They call us homophobic and transphobic and all the different names. They told us that we would never be able to find a job if we spoke against it. They said, please seek psychological counseling. And they gave us the number for a therapist. They're telling you, you're wrong, you're the problem. What happened to believe all women? I'm a woman telling you I feel uncomfortable, and you're saying that you don't believe me?
Well, thank you all. This is a great day, great time to be in one of the most important battleground states in this year, not just this election, but for the future of this country. I'm very blessed that I get to meet with so many different people across this country and some of the coolest people I've met in just the past several months. And I'm really honored to be here with two people that have quickly become my heroes. Paula Scanlan is an absolute American hero, a feminist icon who has been fighting on the front lines for women's rights, especially when it comes to equality and opportunities in sports and education, up against this insane trend, in fact, I would say, of transgender sports, where men can claim to be women and then compete and destroy women's sports and opportunities. But then I'm also blessed to have met Dave McCormick, who I found out a few months ago has 6 daughters. My goodness, you deserve a medal just for that. I get comments all the time because I've got 7 kids, but I don't have 6 daughters. I've only got 3 daughters, and that's a whole task in and of itself. But Dave has really emerged as what I would say, a true family champion. And for my organization, American Principles Project, which we call ourselves Big Family, we're trying to compete with Big Pharma and Big Oil. We want the family to be the most powerful special interest group in the country. But Dave has emerged very quickly as someone that's fearless, who's willing to take tough stands up against all the elites that have all the power in this country. And I'm just so blessed that these two people have agreed to join the stage and have a serious conversation about how we're going to protect girls' sports. So I've got some questions. I just want you guys to speak in your own words. But Dave, the first question goes to you. You know, up until recently, Title IX was like this very boring, esoteric topic that not a lot of people talked about. But then you started having all these guys start to compete against girls in sports. Now, you're a guy, so people would wonder why you would want to be interested in that. But you obviously have 6 daughters, you have a wife. Why is this issue important to you, and why do you think that our country should tackle it?
Yeah, well, first of all, Terry, thank you so much for hosting, and Paula, thank you for being here.
Just getting to know Paula, but an incredible story and a really amazing leadership. And, I was a college athlete in the 80s, Division I college athlete in the 80s. And what's happened to women's sports as a consequence of Title IX has been incredible. I mean, we've got unbelievable sports in college today. Women's sports are on the move. Some of the greatest athletes in the world coming out of our sports programs. And what's happening with the introduction of biological males competing in women's sports is a really undermining of what's happened with Title IX. Not only is it deeply unfair from a competitive standpoint to women, it's really cutting against the very premise of Title IX and the great strides that have been made in women's sports. More than that, it's very personal to me. All 6 of my girls were athletes, are athletes. One of them is a Division I soccer player today. And the idea that their college experience, their opportunity to compete would be undermined by this transgender agenda is really upsetting. So I come at this as someone who hopefully in the Senate will be able to be a strong voice on policy, but also someone who feels this very personally as a father.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because a lot of times, I'm in DC so much, and a lot of times this stuff's talked about in theoretical terms. It's not, on the ground. There's no real experience here. But Paula, you're someone that's got firsthand experience of dealing with this in a unique way than a lot of the other people, in that you actually had a male who identified as a woman on your swim team. I know your story. I think it's horrific. I think it's a huge injustice, but a lot of people haven't heard it yet. So can you share what your experience was? Just tell your story, because I think that if everyone heard your story, this issue would be solved overnight.
Well, I would hope it would be solved overnight, but unfortunately, we're still here having to fight these things. I went to college right here in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, and in this experience, there was a male athlete who was named William who competed on the men's team for 3 years, and one day he just said that he identified as a woman and was going to be transitioning over to our team. And I thought that it was a joke at first because I said, there's no way a 6'4" tall man could be put on a women's sports team. Yet he was put on our team. And in this experience, he was given all the same opportunities the other women were. He was undressing in our locker room not once or twice, but 18 times per week that we were on this team. We were forced to undress with him. And when we tried to raise our concerns to the athletic department, they told us that we would never be able to find a job if we spoke against it. They said that we were bigoted and hateful if we didn't accept him. And they continued to just tell us that us objecting to in any way, shape, or form made us horrible people. And the last thing they said to us in this meeting, they said, if everything we've told you about this is not enough to accept him completely on your team, they said, please seek psychological counseling. And they gave us the number for a therapist. And it was really in that I saw one man and one male athlete more important than the entirety of the women's swim team. And he went on and won an NCAA championship in the 500-yard freestyle. And the second, third, and fourth place girls in that event were Olympic medalists. And it really shows, again, how far you can go from being a mediocre male athlete. On the men's team, he never qualified for the NCAA championship. And then he went on and won an event outright. It was crazy. And really, again, the university told us at every stage we were wrong, we were hateful, we were the problem if we objected to this. And again, by telling us to get therapy, I think that is an attempt to re-educate us. And that was just what they were doing, not just to me, but to other Ivy League athletes that were also competing against us. They were told the same things. And that just shows how horrifying this issue is, that there's no room for conversation.
Well, but in your story, though, when we were talking, how you described some of the things that they put you through, Paula, they put you through what I would say is like a Chinese communist struggle session.
Yeah, we had mandatory team meetings with the LGBT Center and other administrators. I mean, there's a million administrators on college campuses that don't normally do much. And I guess they finally found their purpose in trying to control our swim team. It was crazy. I mean, they would send a representative from the athletic department actually to watch our practices. They sent a representative from the athletic department to come on our training trip to make sure they knew that we were watching. They were highlighting Thomas's accomplishments on social media and not honoring anyone else's accomplishments in the pool. Again, yeah, it was continual following up and telling us again we were hateful, we were in the wrong, and we objected to this in any way. And it was just a horrifying experience. And I felt like I was crazy for thinking that it's so wrong for a man to compete on a women's sports team. But yet they made me feel like I was the one who needed to be re-educated. I was the one who was somehow crazy for thinking that, again, a 6'4" tall, fully attacked male does not belong in a women's sports team or in a women's locker room.
It's incredible. And you hear from the legacy media, oh, this isn't happening. But then when it does, it's a great thing. And they're putting Leah Thomas all over. And Dave, you were saying before the program, there's like 574 cases of men taking women's championships and competitions or something like that.
I was just preparing for this discussion. According to the Women's Sports Policy Working Group, which, as you said, is not a conservative group, but more of a liberal group, they identified 578 cases where biological males had prevailed in victory in women's sports. So this is not a rare thing, and it's a trend that's growing, and it's a trend that has strong support, certainly among some in our Congress and in our Senate with the Equality Act and all that went with that in terms of undermining Title IX. So this is becoming a mainstream idea, and that's why I just respect your courage so much to stand out and be an independent voice about something that just is fundamentally wrong and doesn't make sense and is going to destroy something I think we all hold very dear, which is the great women's sports we have in our country and how great and competitive they've become.
Dave, so we've gotten, America's up to 25 states now that have protected girls' sports at the state level. But this stuff's still happening because you have some states that actually encourage this and incentivize this. And now those states, because of how college sports work, they're competing in these states that have protected girls' sports. President Trump has said he's going to ban this at the federal level. The House of Representatives has passed legislation. You're going to the Senate. Do you agree? Sometimes in D.C., it gets into this nerdish, wonkish, debate over states' rights versus federal. Where do you come down on that? Do you think there should be national legislation, and will you support it?
Well, I think there has to be national legislation. You can't deal with this piecemeal at the state level because you have schools that are competing across state lines, obviously different leagues. And so we have to deal with women's sports as a national issue and a national agenda. And so I'd be very much in favor and be a champion of legislation that protected women's sports and really stops this, what can only be described as a set of ideas that is undermining the very premise of Title IX. And so I think we're going to have to deal with it legislatively. I support President Trump and his efforts and would be a strong proponent in the Senate.
Yeah, I do think it's important to point out that the Democrats, specifically your opponent, Bob Casey, supports the Equality Act, which would undo every piece of state-based legislation. So all those 25 states that we worked so hard to get to protect women's sports, those would all be wiped out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I pointed to the fact that this isn't a rare exception. Senator Casey, in a letter to one of his constituents who was challenging the senator's support for the Equality Act, said this is much ado about nothing. This is something that's being elevated as a political point as opposed to something that really poses any fundamental threat to women's sports. And I think that's the problem. If you start to sort of try to dismiss this as an isolated case, people who are resisting this, like you so bravely did, as somehow being racist or somehow not being fair-minded, I think this will take hold. And it really, the consequences of having biological men competing in women's sports, I think is very significant for many different aspects of the college experience. I also think, sadly, it's part of a broader trend on campuses where a liberal extreme agenda has hijacked the administration, has hijacked professors. We see it in the anti-Semitism on Penn's campus. We see it in women's sports. So this is part of a broader problem. But this particular issue, I think we can solve with leadership in the White House and strong leadership in the Senate.
It's really funny how they choose which issues to take. I mean, every other time where it's an isolated incident, they say a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's funny what their priorities are. But Paul, I want to get back to you because, like I said earlier, we've seen the viral videos, right, of these guys just dominating women's sports, actually like causing real physical damage. There was one girl in volleyball that almost died because she got hit in the face with the ball too hard. But you've got a different perspective on this because you didn't just have to compete against a male, one or two times. You had a male on your team that was always there. So can you talk just a little bit more about what it was like to constantly, every day at your practices, in the locker rooms, all your private spaces, what it was like to constantly have your space invaded by a male?
I mean, the best way to explain it was truly a nightmare. And I remember after talking about the experience, of course, the sports part was unfair. And I started by thinking, this is really unfair watching him compete against women. I remember our first meet, we swam against Columbia at our first dual meet, and our relay was behind. Thomas hopped into the pool and quickly passed the girl swimming for Columbia, and we won the relay. And I had this feeling of, am I happy that we won? Or do I feel this immense feeling of guilt that we won this event? And I'm looking at the Columbia girls looking so disappointed, having tried so hard. And I knew immediately in that moment, it took one race for him to swim in, for me to say this is going to be a horrible season, because I felt as if I was part of something that was so wrong. I felt every single accomplishment our team had for the entire season felt tainted. It didn't matter who swam well or who won a best time or how we placed in the Ivy League or how many dual meets that we won. Every single time we did something like that, it felt like I was part of something that was so wrong. And I don't even know how to look holistically at our entire season anymore because it's just completely tainted. And again, it doesn't even matter what the other people on the team accomplished or didn't accomplish because it will forever be tainted by that. And the worst part was really the locker room quickly became the worst. It's something I explained to a lot of people is when you're in the locker room, you're not really actively listening to anyone's conversations, but there were people talking in the background and I would hear a male voice and I would jump up and I would say, oh my gosh, someone's in here that's not supposed to be in here. And then I would jump myself back to reality and say, no, they've invited this man to be in our locker room. He's supposed to be here. And of course, I was very well aware to cover myself if Thomas was walking by. And I was, at one point, I even stopped addressing the locker room altogether. But what this showed me is we're teaching girls to ignore their instincts. And I think that's what's so dangerous about this entire thing is they're telling you, if you feel uncomfortable with this male voice, you feel like a man shouldn't be in your locker room, you're wrong, you're the problem. And we're putting girls into dangerous situations. And we've seen this now. There's a case in Loudoun County, Virginia, where there was a male in the bathroom. Again, the girls are told to accept this, and it puts them into, she was put into a very dangerous situation. And I think that that's really when I realized how problematic this was. And again, it was every single week and every single day you would change, you would hear a male voice. It was just instant feeling of discomfort. And again, I would have nightmares throughout the season about people being allowed in our locker room, just the repercussions of, again, inviting men into private women's spaces. And when I talk about that, people on the left are attacking me, saying that I'm lying. And to them, I say, what happened to believe all women? You guys have pushed this Me Too movement and saying believe all women. I'm a woman telling you I feel uncomfortable, and this is a situation that is similar to being sexually harassed, and you're saying that you don't believe me? And they don't. And they actively want to pretend that this isn't happening, and they call us homophobic and transphobic and all the different names if we say that we're not comfortable with men in our private changing spaces.
It's absolutely terrible. Dave, I really want to get back to Bob Casey because he is probably my least favorite senator. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot I don't like. But, you know, his dad was very popular, but his dad was actually a pretty moderate guy. Pro-life, pro-working class, you know, super smart politician, actually represented his state very well. But he's no moderate. I mean, he claims he's a moderate, but he's absolutely not. Can you actually support? I have two questions for you. So you've got 6 daughters. Paul and I looked this up before. He's got 4 daughters.
Yeah.
So he's attacking you all across the state, saying that you're against women and the typical lies that we hear all the time. So I have 2 questions for you. One, do you think you can be a moderate and support redefining gender, right? What a man is and what a woman is? That seems kind of radical to me. And then 2, can you really be a proponent of women and support allowing men to compete against women?
Yeah, this is part of a broader point regarding Bob Casey. He's been in elected office for 30 years. And when he ran for office, he ran much like his father had been, as a moderate Democrat, someone who on social issues held moderate or even conservative positions, someone who was for the working class and so forth, as you said. And what's happened over a 30-year period is Bob Casey went to the Senate to change Washington, and Washington changed Bob Casey. The Democratic Party has moved increasingly to the left. And Bob Casey, presumably to stay viable, has flip-flopped on all his positions, where he now votes 99% of the time with his party and with President Biden and Vice President Harris. And if Vice President Harris were to become president, he would vote 99% of the time with her. And so a whole set of liberal policies, whether it's wide open borders, whether it's defund the police, whether it's to transform our entire economy to electric vehicles and lithium batteries and solar panels at the expense of jobs and fossil fuels, or whether it's social issues, whether it's the issue of reproductive rights, or whether it is the issue of transgender. He has adopted the most liberal positions in his party. I'm not sure what's actually going on in his head, but he has voted for these extreme policies and hasn't been strong enough to stand up to his party. So I don't think you can be a moderate. You can speak in moderate tones and act like you're a moderate, but you can't actually be a moderate. You're an extreme liberal if you're or radical if you're embracing the policies that he's embraced. And I don't think that you can survive, at least Bob Casey doesn't think he can survive, in the Democratic Party by being an independent voice and being a leader with moral courage to speak out on these things. So I think while Bob Casey presents as a moderate, he has demonstrated he's a career politician, too weak to stand up in his party, and represents a set of very extreme policies. And so as a father, I'm not sure how he can make sense of these policies. I'm not sure how he could rationalize voting for the Equality Act, given the implications for biological males competing in women's sports and the undermining of Title IX. I'm not sure he's reconciled it himself, but I am sure that if he goes to Washington for 6 more years, Pennsylvanians can count on a very extreme liberal agenda by a career politician. And I don't think that's in line. This issue is just one of many examples where the policies he's promoting are not in line with the views of most Pennsylvanians.
Yeah, no, and if Kamala gets elected, the bottom's really gonna fall out. Speaking of politicians, Paula, there are basically three types of politicians on this issue. There's the enemies like Bob Casey, who's actually pushing legislation to erase all the progress we've made. There's the champions like Dave. But then there's the politicians that are, I would say, is in the coward camp. They stay silent. They avoid this issue. They don't want to talk about it. I know what you'd say to Dave. You'd probably say thank you and keep going. But what would you say if Bob Casey was here? What would you say to him? And then what would you say to the guys that are staying silent and staying away from this fight?
Yeah, well, to Bob Casey, this is why we had researched these daughters. How could you possibly have daughters and want to subject them to this? And I'm not even if they don't play sports. We're looking at bathrooms, at scholarship opportunities, right? With the new Title IX rewrite the Biden-Harris administration has put through. People who are men who quote-unquote identify as women are now entitled to taking athletic and academic scholarships from women. You're looking at girls losing their opportunity from going to college at all. Or worse, you show up and you drop your 17-year-old daughter off to college and you find out her randomly assigned roommate is actually a man who says that he identifies as a woman. I mean, we're looking at every single aspect of women's protections. This is not just sports. And so if you don't have an athlete daughter, it doesn't matter. This will affect you. And how can you say that you're for women if you do not support this? How can you be a father of daughters and support something like this? And so to him, again, you need to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself how you could possibly accept this. And I don't see any way to rationalize it. I really don't. And to the politicians who know that this is wrong and aren't willing to speak up, honestly, I think that they might be worse. It's the people who see something that's so wrong and know that it's wrong, but continue to stay silent. They are part of the problem. And for me personally on my journey and what I experienced, I felt the same way. I had this immense feeling of guilt for not speaking up. I said I knew what I experienced was wrong, but I was afraid I might lose some friends or someone might say something mean about me. But what's at stake here is the well-being of young girls. We're looking at high school athletes who are affected by this. I mean, I've even met with elementary school students who have been roomed with boys on trips or have boys changing in their bathrooms. It's an attack on the family. It's an attack on parents, parental rights. There's parents who don't even know that their kids are being roomed with boys or being forced to play sports with them or have them in their bathrooms. And the people who know that this is wrong and aren't willing to say something, they're part of the problem and they're contributing to what we're seeing happen across this country.
So Dave, we're in Philadelphia, obviously. I know you got to run and serve some cheesecakes, I think, or cheesesteaks. God, I keep saying cheesecake, cheesesteaks. I want to give the last word to you. You know, our whole mission is to make sure that the voters know where these politicians stand. So I want to turn it to you. You're running for U.S. Senate to represent the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We've talked a lot about women's sports, but I want you to put in your own words. Why are you running? What's your vision for this state? What are you going to do when you get to Washington?
Yeah, well, thanks. You know, I'd run before and lost a close primary by 900 votes, a 1.5 million cast. And so I thought probably never run again. You know, it just didn't work out. But the reason I'm running is because I think the country really is in trouble. I think we're in decline. I think we're in decline spiritually, morally. I think the topic we've just discussed is emblematic of that decline at basic values. I think we're in decline economically, a huge debt burden and an economy that's not working for most Pennsylvanians with sky-high prices. I think we're less secure than we've ever been before because of wide open border that's bringing violent criminals, predators into our country. 25,000 just released a letter recently from ICE that showed 25,000 convicted murderers and rapists have been led in our country under the Biden-Harris Casey administration. A fentanyl crisis, a war on fossil fuels, crime in Philadelphia moving to the suburbs. So 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country is headed in the wrong direction. We've been here before as a country, and we've been able to avoid going over the cliff and pull ourselves back and have another great chapter of renewal, but it requires leadership. The right leadership that'll stand up with strength, with moral courage, an independent voice. And that's what this Senate seat's all about. This Senate seat is arguably in the most important state in the country. Who wins Pennsylvania will likely decide the presidency. If I win this seat, it will certainly contribute to flipping the majority. And the senior senator from Pennsylvania, or the senator from Pennsylvania, can have a big voice in getting our country moving in the right direction. And so the reason I'm doing this is I think I can win. I think when I do win, I could be a real positive influence for making change. And I think we're in desperate need of change. And Bob Casey has been the opposite of change. He's been someone who's been a career politician that's been too weak to stand up and has just gone along with the crowd. I'm someone who's a seventh generation Pennsylvanian, someone who's a political outsider, someone who has run a business, someone who went to West Point, and someone who served our country in combat. So I bring that sense of duty on our country and leadership to the task. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that I'll win the election. When I do, I'd be honored to kind of lead the charge as Pennsylvania's next senator on this issue and many others.
Well, I thank you for not letting me down and embarrassing me when I said you guys are my heroes. This conversation is exactly the type of conversations I want more people to have. So, obviously, so grateful for you guys having this conversation. Thank you so much. It's so important. And I can't wait to get you in to the Senate. You're going to be a great fighting force, not just for APP and our issues, but for every working class family, for everyone out there. I really do think you're the tip of the spear. And Paula, I'm just so proud of you and how courageous you've been. I mean, you're up against a really powerful industry, that's got a lot of hands in the media and everywhere. And so thank you guys both for this conversation and for
Head off the Paula. At your point in your life to have
The courage to stand up against the crowd. That says a lot about you, and we need a lot more of that. So thank you. And Terry, thank you for hosting an incredible conversation and for all that you do to try to get our country back on track.
Well, thank you guys so much.